Welcome to this week's news roundup. For those in the United States, happy Thanksgiving. And whether you are celebrating the holiday or not, hopefully you're going to get a game to the table to play with your family. But for now, let's find out what's happening in the world of tabletop gaming for the week of November 20th, 2023. Our first story is going to be about Asmodee and the Embracer Group that owns it. This juggernaut that bought up so many different game companies has shown some positive growth over the last few years, which is even greater in comparison to the other properties that the Embracer Group owns, which haven't shown said growth. So much so that we knew there was a $1.4 billion deficit that the Embracer Group said they were going to have to do some firing and restructuring. Now, I did report on this before, but at the time we weren't 100% sure if this was just going to be in the areas that are not as growth positive. As I stated, Asmodee was doing well for them with a 25% increase over the last year, or whether this is going to be in every studio. Now, it turns out they've already fired over 900 people, and these were actually not a part of the Asmodee group. This is much more in the more lacking areas, as I stated earlier. Unfortunately, now it now seems to be Asmodee's turn as they announce that they're going to have to do their own restructuring, which will include a loss of employees along with the previous 900 mentioned before. This is obviously a little worrisome. As I stated, this is their best group, and it seems that cutting the previous 900 wasn't enough. We'll see how this goes and whether Embracer Group actually starts selling things off. I believe there was actually rumors of them selling Gearbox, creators of Borderlands, and whether we'll see that happen within Asmodee. Now, it should be noted that there are plenty of companies I can imagine them splitting off from Asmodee and selling off. One of the things that should be noted that even though Asmodee did show a large growth for the Embracer Group, it was apparently pushed a lot more by trading cards. In particular, one of the things was them selling the license to Middle-earth, as they have the Middle-earth Enterprise, basically control of the Lord of the Rings licenses and stuff, to Magic the Gathering, which was a huge boom for both Hasbro and, well, the Embracer Group and Asmodee in this case. So there's definitely going to be a stronger focus, I'm sure, on trading cards. I bet we're not going to see any cuts. In fact, we have probably more emphasis put in the new Fantasy Flight Star Wars card game that should be releasing next year. Now, while it hasn't received the same hype as Disney's Lorcana, I imagine that they're going to try and make sure that this hits the shelves and at the very least is able to avoid the current blunders that Disney's Lorcana is coming up against. But we'll talk about that in the next story. So Disney's Lorcana, extremely popular, caused huge lines at basically every convention, everyone trying to get their hands on it, which of course has enticed people to start scalping the product, selling it at much higher costs. And that is no exception to the new set that just came out, Rise of the Floodborn. This just recently came out, and the boxes, I believe, are supposed to sell for $144 around there, but currently online are more selling closer to $250, and that's probably more of an average rather than what might be available to you. Now, in order to combat this, Ravensburger was going to sell directly to customers online. Now, this wouldn't be a perfect fix, but by selling at MSRP to hopefully enough people, that should get enough people excited and be able to get their hands on the card game rather than being disappointed and having to pay a much higher markup. Unfortunately, things didn't go so well because they got DDoS attacked. Basically, tons of bots swarmed the online place, and as best as they could try, unfortunately, they couldn't fight it off and had to shut down the online store. Now, according to the reports, we do know that they did expect to have some kind of high volume, especially some of bots, of course, but there's just way too many that were going on, and even every countermeasure they threw back at it, apparently the bots just got more aggressive. They didn't say the origin point of the bots. I assume this wasn't all from one person. I wouldn't be surprised if there are multiple strings of bots from different origins because everyone's just trying to get their hands on this to scalp it. And when it comes to scalpers, bots are a usual tool in their utility belts. So I just imagine too many people, too many bots, it's just so hard to handle that they just couldn't prepare for it. So unfortunately, this seems to have taken out the online store and taken out, as far as I can tell, for a while. They did say that they didn't give an exact date, but we'll let you know when it comes up. But from some of the other stuff I read, at the very least, it doesn't sound like this store is going to open up again, at least for this wave of the Rise of the Floodborn. It could open up when they have more precautions ways to handle larger amounts of traffic for the later reprint waves, but right now I wouldn't count on that being a way for you to get your hands on the cards. Now, we have an interesting case here involving two companies that are actually suing each other all around the same time, and not technically, at least from what I can tell, a countersuit. This involves the game companies University Games and Forbidden Games. Earlier, University Games made a deal with Forbidden Games saying that they would gain their game properties and intellectual rights for $2 million, with an additional $1 million on the table depending on how well they sold afterwards. University Games also agreed to take on Drover, one of the heads of Forbidden Games, as well as some of their employees to work at University Games. However, things did not go amicably, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about this in a news story. What we know from the court filings is first, University Games filed on October 30th. They stated that, looking at my phone to make sure I got it right here, that Forbidden Games failed to transfer the assets and intellectual property as required by contract, as well as failing to transfer monetary proceeds to UGC's account, and then refusing to work with them under the terms, violating procedures and policies, interfering with development and launch of UGC games, and claiming that the intellectual property Drover and Forbidden Games had transferred still belonged to Drover. Now, Forbidden Games filed their own court case just the next day on October 31st. And just based on the complexity of it, I don't think it was a countersuit. I think it was more of maybe the two threatened each other to begin with about court filings, and they both sort of just went through with it and just happened to be within 24 hours of each other. Now, Forbidden Games is stating that, once again, looking at my phone here, that once the deal was completed, University Games promoted their games over Forbidden Game titles, slashing Forbidden Games' marketing budget in order to thwart their games from selling enough in order to get that additional $1 million bonus. It was also stated that Drover, as well as all the employees who joined with him at University Games, were humiliated and undermined on a regular basis, causing a hostile work environment for the employees and Drover, who did actually resign afterwards. Now, both are technically asking for different things, but basically sum up for compensation for the harm the other did to them. So I don't know what would happen in this situation. I don't know whether the two cases are going to be combined. Does case A, the first one submitted, have to go through first? And basically what happens there could auto include or finish the second one, or whether they both go on parallel, which would be very interesting, especially if there are different judges, jury are involved in those situations. Or, of course, it could just be something where it's submitted and then a deal is made before we really even see any court proceedings. Either way, anyone who is much more knowledgeable in law, I would love to hear your opinion on this matter, as I cannot think of a situation where it seems that two cases were submitted so close to each other that wasn't an obvious countersuit. Or maybe this does count as a countersuit and I'm just unsure about the exact terminology there, which is very likely considering I did not go to law school. Either way, we'll see what happens with this board game company feud and see how things shake out. Next, we got 3 quick news stories for you. First, Hasbro announced the winners of their Women's Innovators of Play. This was a contest or search for female game designers, with the winners having their games designed, from what I can tell, and including $10,000, being able to visit Hasbro and get mentorship for, I assume, not only this game, but future game design products. Now, there are 3 winners. First, Ellie Dix, who owns the Dark Imp, which actually has made other games before. We have Sandra Harwood, who has had their game, the one they submitted, I assume, actually shown off at the White House and is a Women's in Games ambassador. And finally, Mandy and Maggie Godard, who are a parent-child duo who designed a preschool game for this contest. Each of them designed their own game. We don't have too many details, at least that I could find at the moment, for what those games will be. But I'm very curious to see how they turn out and whether this will be a more common thing we see in the future coming from Hasbro. Next, though, sticking with Hasbro, we have a story about Magic the Gathering. Now, there was a recent set release on the plane of Ixalan where you have dinosaurs, merfolk, pirates. It's a cool plane. However, unfortunately, there seems to be some art theft happening as well. One card, Wayfarer's Bauble, if you compare the background of that card to another art piece, you may notice it's very, very similar. The artist of the original background noticed that as well and posted it on Twitter, showing the two off and saying, hey, someone's using my art. Now, it should be stated that the person who did the art for Wayfarer's Bauble did respond and say, yes, I screwed up here. I used your art. Their account, though, has since been deactivated on Twitter, X, whatever you still would want to call it. But regardless, this is another case of art theft. Granted, the last story time we talked about that seemed to be about the special cards in Strixhaven, I believe it was. So with all the cards that come out, it's probably going to have some more issues like that. I'm sure I'll still talk about them when they happen in the future Magic the Gathering releases. And then finally, the World Championship for Flesh and Blood was held in Barcelona, Spain. And congratulations to Alexandros for winning with their Fey Rebellion deck. This, of course, not only gave them a bunch of fun little prizes, but $100,000 as well. And now let's talk about some new game announcements. First, Pathfinder has their new Players and Game Masters books out. This is not the second edition that came out a while ago. This is their Orc version of the game. Basically, after the whole OGL incident, they now have released the versions that have nothing D&D related in them. No same spells, monsters. So if you want to make sure you're playing from pure Pathfinder now, you'll want to pick up these books. Next, we have a Rocky Horror Show game that's actually made by University Games, the one we talked a little bit about before, and also Silver Eye, which is the newest edition in the Silver series from Bezier Games that will come out next year. From Lucky Duck, we have a game called Nestlings. This is a game in which you will play as birds fighting over your superiority in different biomes. So if you need another board game that isn't Wingspan but is bird related, you may want to check this one out. Then I talked a little bit about this before, about the game Aqua, but now we have some official images of the cover art. This is from Sidekick Games. And if you want to get a bit festive, Final Girl has a new expansion coming out that's Christmas themed titled North Pole Nightmares. In this one, you will have to fight off Krampus, either as an elf or as Mrs. Claus herself. So you can add this to your Final Girl collection or just play this one for its own Christmas theme. There are a ton of Warhammer 40k announcements, but the big one I want to actually point out is Legions Imperialis, as this is a new game which is using basically everything shrunk down. So it's going to be more of like almost the Armada compared to the X-Wing, with you controlling more of the tanks and titans rather than your Space Marine, more human-sized troopers. And then finally, like I said, Magic the Gathering released their Ixalan world set, and they of course needed to have a few of their secret lairs. And they decided to do one that I'm shocked, though I find it hilarious, including two of the most popular meme cards, or memes out there now cards, for you to add to your Magic the Gathering collection. Or maybe just to have because they're hilarious. Now, in terms of Kickstarter, there are a few that are running out soon, so you may want to hop on those. First, we have 2 reprints and deluxifications for Kalamali, as well as Alhambra the Red Palace. Then we have Deceased, the Zombicide DC game, and like many CMON games, usually ends within a week of it actually being launched. Finally, there is the Saw game, Saw Jigsaw Trials, so if you want to be a part of that horror franchise, make sure to check out this project before it ends. But that is all we have this week. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Were you able to get your hands on any of the new Disney Lorcana set? Do you know anything else and can better explain what's happening with the court case? I'd love to hear anything you have to say down below. But for now, that's all I have this week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week on the News Roundup.